Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into something truly, well, mind-bending. Göbekli Tepe.
Right.
It's this site found again in the 90s near Old Ur in Turkey, and it's making us rethink pretty much everything about our ancient past.
It really is. And our mission here for this deep dive is to unpack what makes Göbekli Tepe so important and why it's such a, let's say, disruption to the standard story of history.
Yeah.
We've got some great sources you pull together, YouTube docs, a podcast interview, so we get the archaeology, but also some of the more speculative ideas floating around.
Okay, so let's dive in. The story kicks off, 1994? A local farmer finds these weird statues on this hill called Potbelly Hill.
Göbekli Tepe, yeah.
Göbekli Tepe in Turkish. And at first, the local museum, they didn't really get how huge this was, right? They even got the age wrong initially.
Well, yeah, and the key moment seems to be when archaeologist Klaus Schmidt saw them. He visited the museum and apparently recognized similarities to another site, Nevali Chori, which he knew was very old. It's also interesting that someone had looked at it before. An American, Peter Benedict, did some work there way back in the 60s, but somehow its significance just didn't click then.
Huh. And the sheer size of this place, it's hard to wrap your head around, 25 acres, at least 20 stone circles found so far.
And over 200 of those massive T-shaped pillars, some are huge, over 16 feet tall. Just imagine quarrying and moving those.
And the age. This is the really staggering part. Carbon dating puts it around 11,600 years ago.
Which is, what, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge? Older than the pyramid?
Exactly. By millennia, we're talking right at the end of the last ice age.
Just incredible.
And our sources mention it wasn't alone, right? There's this whole Stone Hills complex, other sites nearby like Karahan Tepe and Nevali Chori.
Şanlıurfa, too. It points to a much bigger picture, a whole cultural thing happening in that region, not just one isolated miracle.
So this completely clashes with the old textbook picture of the Stone Age, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The standard view was hunter-gatherers back then were, relatively simple nomadic groups.
Right.
Definitely not people building monumental architecture on this scale.
Right. Göbekli Tepe implies they had sophisticated knowledge, tools okay, stone tools, but still effective and, crucially, organization. Way earlier than we thought possible.
And another puzzle. At the oldest levels, there's no sign of farming. No domesticated animals. That's quite different from other sites popping up around the same time or slightly later.
So what did they find?
Just remains of wild animals, wild plants, gazelles, boar, that kind of thing.
And no houses. No signs of people actually living there day to day.
Pretty much, yeah. No fireplaces, no ovens. That's why Schmidt thought it was purely ceremonial, a sanctuary, maybe a pilgrimage site for these nomadic groups.
A cultic site, he called it.
Exactly. Which leads to the question of how they built it. Those monoliths, some weighing tons.
How did they move them? How many people did it take? Schmidt's guessed maybe 500 people, organized by a priestly class.
That was his initial hypothesis, yeah. Needing a big workforce, directed by some kind of authority. But one documentary mentioned an alternative idea.
Oh, yeah, the Easter Island comparison.
Right, suggesting maybe a smaller, more specialized crew could have done it. Perhaps just a few dozen skilled people, rather than hundreds of laborers.
That's a fascinating contrast. Do we know where they got the stone?
We do. There's evidence of quarries nearby. They even found a huge, 7-meter pillar, unfinished, still in the quarry. Gives us clues about their methods.
And it sounds like they built these enclosures pretty fast. Weeks or months, maybe?
The data suggests that, yeah. Which points to intense, coordinated bursts of activity.
Okay, let's talk about the art. The carvings are just elaborate, sometimes bizarre. Animals everywhere.
Gazelles, boars, foxes, famously. Foxes with snakes for penises, which is memorable. Vultures, snakes, scorpions, too. And some human-like figures, even depictions of skulls.
What strikes me is the focus on male animals. Very few female figures, right? Which is different from other Neolithic sites.
Very different, yeah. Lots of theories on what it all means. Totems for different groups. Guardians of some kind of spirit world. Shamanic symbols. The fox is often linked to shamans in various cultures.
It feels like they're telling stories, maybe myths, encoding knowledge.
Could be. It's a symbolic landscape.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mention that because there's that other find, the Eartha Man statue from Urfa, which is even older, about 11,700 years old.
Right, predating farming, too.
And it's this incredibly naturalistic human sculpture. So realistic. It's such a contrast to the symbolic, animal-heavy art at Göbekli Tepe itself. different ways of representing the world happening around the same time.
So back to the function. Schmidt saw it as this major spiritual center, a sacred navel of the earth.
Like Delphi or Cusco later on, yeah. A place where hunter-gatherer groups from all over would come together for festivals, rituals.
And the evidence points to feasting, right? Lots of animal bones found.
Huge amounts. Suggests big communal meals were a major part of whatever went on there. And maybe that wishing tree tradition in the area today is like a faint echo of these ancient gatherings.
And looking nearby, Nevalachori had that snake bearer statue and a stone basin, some think, was for sacrifices.
It hints at a wider regional set of beliefs and practices, yeah. And they even found possible musical instruments. Bull roarers, clappers. Suggests sound, maybe chanting or dancing was part of the rituals.
Plus, finding obsidian from Cappadocia, that means people were traveling long distances, or there were trade networks already.
Definitely. People were connected over surprisingly large areas even then.
Okay, so then, why did it end? Around 8000 BC, they just buried it. Deliberately.
Yeah, that's the consensus. They intentionally covered the entire site with earth, a massive undertaking in itself.
But why?
Well, theories range. Maybe the climate changed, resources shifted, making the site less important. Maybe the rise of farming changed society so much that these old ritual centers lost their meaning.
Or maybe it was symbolic, like the site's purpose was fulfilled, so they ritually closed it down.
That's another possibility. It became symbolically dead, perhaps. And they even buried the last smaller circle they built there, too. It wasn't just the big old ones.
This whole discovery just blows up the old timeline for the Neolithic Revolution, the shift to farming.
Completely. Initially, some thought maybe farming started right there because they found wild wheat nearby, some early-looking sickle blades.
Mithun had that idea about ritual seed handling.
Yeah, but the thinking has shifted. It looks more like agriculture started in multiple places, maybe even before Göbekli Tepe's main phase. Ohelo II in Israel shows early plant cultivation, for example.
So Göbekli Tepe wasn't the cause of farming, necessarily.
Probably not the direct cause, no. Animal domestication came later too. Places like Shano show the beginnings of that. The idea gaining ground now is that maybe the big cultural shifts, the symbolic changes, came first.
Like the Natufian culture. Settled hunter-gatherers, complex burials, art, before full-blown farming.
Exactly. People like Renfrew talk about the sapient paradox, or Dunbar's number. Basically, the idea that humans needed a kind of revolution in shared symbols and beliefs to manage larger groups before things like agriculture really took off. Maybe Göbekli Tepe is evidence of that symbolic revolution.
Of course, you can't talk about Göbekli Tepe without mentioning the other theory.
And more speculative ones, yeah. Like Graham Hancock's idea of a lost, advanced civilization that influenced it.
That gets a lot of attention, but the counter-argument is usually, well, where are the metal tools? Where's the writing?
Right. Those are usually seen as hallmarks of advanced civilizations. Though proponents might argue they chose not to use metal, or relied on oral tradition, or the evidence is just lost.
And then there's the cataclysm idea. The Y files connected it to the torrid meteor shower. Pillar 43 as some kind of astronomical record or warning.
That's another interpretation out there. And the deliberate burial fits into that narrative for some, either preserving the site from a cataclysm or maybe hiding evidence of one.
It is weird how sophisticated the stonework seems to appear so suddenly in that area, without obvious earlier stages right there.
That's a point the alternative theories often emphasize, yeah. The perceived lack of a clear local precursor for that level of skill.
Okay, back to the more mainstream ideas about ritual. People like Cavin argued that religion, the birth of the gods, might have actually driven the move to farming, not just economic need.
Yeah, that ritual and belief were the prime movers. And thinkers like Eliade or Durkheim highlighted how intense shared rituals, maybe ecstatic experiences, could forge strong communities.
Or Hayden's idea of competitive feasting. Like, early leaders emerged by throwing the biggest parties.
That's one theory for how hierarchy might have started, though feasting could also just be about reinforcing community bonds, more egalitarian.
So maybe Göbekli Tepe was this central place people came to seasonally. For rituals, yes, but also trade, sharing stories, arranging marriages, like later festivals, or even those really old Paleolithic mammoth bone sites.
That seems very plausible. A major congregation point. We see patterns like that in some modern hunter-gatherer groups, too, with different social structures depending on the season.
Though some theories get darker. Scapegoat rituals, maybe hinted at by some pillar carvings, even human sacrifice.
The evidence for sacrifice at Göbekli Tepe is very thin, mostly speculative based on later sites like Çatalhöyük, where it's clearer. But yeah, intense rituals were likely part of it.
Who was in charge? If not chiefs, maybe shamans, proto-priests, a kind of meritocratic theocracy.
That's a really interesting possibility. We see hints of powerful spiritual figures way back in the Paleolithic, the Lion Man sculpture, antler headdresses, cave paintings.
The Songir burials in Russia, too, with all those beads, suggests high status, maybe religious leaders, really early on.
Exactly. And maybe the Venus figurines or other unusual burials.
Right.
They could represent respected shamans or elders. So the idea of spiritual leaders organizing something like Göbekli Tepe isn't out of the blue.
And it makes you wonder if myths survived. Could stories like the Sumerian sacred mountain, Dooku, be like a super distant folk memory of Göbekli Tepe?
It's fascinating to speculate. We do see some cultural traits from the Stonehills culture, like handling skulls in certain ways or Janus-type figures, persisting for a very long time in that region. Suggests some continuity.
So wrapping up this deep dive, Göbekli Tepe remains this profound mystery. It just forces us to rethink what people were capable of, what they believed, long before cities and writing as we know them.
Absolutely. And it highlights how much we don't know and how archaeology is constantly finding things that challenge the old stories. There's still so much to uncover there.
Yeah, excavations are ongoing. Who knows what they'll find next?
Exactly.
It leaves you with this big question, really. Is Göbekli Tepe just the dawn of civilization as we understand it, or is it maybe an echo of something else? Lost knowledge, maybe even a warning from a past we've completely forgotten?
A provocative thought to end on.
Definitely something to mull over. We'd really recommend checking out the sources we looked at if you want to dig even deeper into this amazing place.